In the spring of 1850, the forest just beyond the east ridge of Shadewood, Ohio, gave up a secret it had kept for months. A group of boys had been hunting rabbits near the church property when one of them slipped down a muddy slope and landed hard against a bundle of burlap. At first, they thought it was a discarded sack of potatoes. Then, one of them saw the pale, waxy curve of a small foot. Sheriff Alton Keyes arrived within the hour. What he found confirmed the boys' worst fears. The burlap sack contained the body of a young girl no more than 8 years old. Her skin was strangely preserved despite the spring thaw. Her hands were folded over her chest. Her eyes were stitched shut. She was wrapped in what appeared to be a ceremonial robe embroidered with a cross and stitched initials E.W. The town doctor estimated she had been dead at least 4 months. But no one in Shadewood seemed to know who she was. No missing child reports had been filed. No family stepped forward. And most disturbingly, no record of any girl matching her description existed anywhere in the county's birth registries. Which is what brought Samuel Cutter to Shadewood. A quiet, methodical man with dark hair and ink-stained fingers, Samuel was not a sheriff or a marshal. He was a legal auditor sent by the Office of Public Records in Columbus to investigate an anomaly in Shadewood's reporting of child welfare disbursements. According to state files, the small church-run manse in Shadewood housed nearly 24 children. Yet, not one had a state-issued birth certificate or guardianship record. State aid, however, had been issued regularly signed and requested by a single man, Reverend Elijah Ward. Samuel Cutter arrived on May 2nd under gray skies and the smell of wet earth. The town was neat, if somber. Brick storefronts lined a cobbled square. A modest chapel stood at the northern edge, whitewashed and clean, surrounded by a cemetery with headstones so old their names had eroded into lichen-covered smudges. The manse stood just behind the chapel, 2 stories simple brick-shuttered windows. There were no children in sight. At the general store, Samuel asked if the manse was currently operating. The storekeeper, a red-faced man named Jonas Hargreaves, hesitated. Well, sure. Reverend Ward's been taking care of orphans near 20 years now. Folks round here call him a saint. Doesn't ask for praise, just does God's work. Have you ever seen the children? Jonas blinked. Course. That is, well, sometimes they come to service. Not often. Poor things are shy. Some got ailments. Reverend says they've had hard lives. Samuel nodded, though something cold had already begun to settle in his chest. That evening, Samuel attended Wednesday prayer service at the chapel. The pews were half full, filled mostly with solemn older couples and a few quiet families. The sermon was simple, scriptural, soft-spoken. Reverend Elijah Ward stood at the front, his voice calm, his hands folded in front of his modest gray robe. His eyes, pale blue and unblinking, scanned the room as if seeing past it. There were no children present, no choir, no laughter in the halls. After service, Samuel introduced himself. The Reverend shook his hand gently. "You've come about the Lord's records, I suspect," he said with a thin smile. "These days even God's houses need ledgers." Samuel smiled politely. "I was hoping to meet the children, to verify our records." "I understand," Reverend Ward said. "But I'm afraid most are asleep now. Some are delicate. Fevers, night terrors. Their little souls are fragile, you see." He said it with such genuine sorrow that Samuel almost believed him. Almost. That night back in his room at the inn, Samuel couldn't sleep. Something about the Reverend's eyes unnerved him. Too still, too calm, like a painting of a man, not the man himself. At midnight he took a walk past the chapel. The town was silent. The moon muted behind clouds. As he passed the manse, he paused. A single candle flickered behind a drawn curtain, and then he heard it. A voice, small, hoarse, from somewhere inside the manse. Don't forget me." The voice was gone as quickly as it came. Samuel stepped closer to the window, but the curtain did not move, and from the shadow of the chapel behind him he felt someone watching. By morning, the fog had lifted, but Samuel Cutter's unease remained. He spent the early hours reviewing county records at the clerk's office in town, hoping, perhaps irrationally, that this was all a clerical mistake. But it wasn't. According to the state's registry of aid-receiving wards, Reverend Elijah Ward had cared for at least 27 children at the Shadewood Manse over the past 10 years. The problem was not one of them had a recorded birth certificate, baptism record, or formal guardianship assignment. All the paperwork, aid applications, medical requisitions, even the census updates had been completed and submitted by Reverend Ward himself. No other names appeared on any documents, and all the children listed, every single one, had the same notations in the margin. No familial contact, rescued, assigned, under spiritual guardianship. It was the kind of phrasing that sounded official but meant nothing at all. Samuel brought the findings to Sheriff Keyes, who had been overseeing the investigation of the dead girl found in the woods. The sheriff was older, leathery, and worn from too many years in a town that rarely asked questions. "Don't see how you plan to prove anything," the sheriff muttered, scanning the names. "Folks around here respect the Reverend. He's helped a lot of the people. Delivered my sister's youngest himself. Buried her too when the fever took her. But these children," Samuel pressed, "have you ever seen them?" The sheriff scratched his beard. "Sure, some. Maybe not lately. But like I said, kids come and go. He finds them, cares for them a while. Then they get adopted out. That's what he always said." "Where are the adoption papers?" There was no answer. Samuel left the sheriff's office with a heaviness in his gut. On his way back to the inn, he stopped at the town's schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of the square. A middle-aged woman named Miss Eleanor Pike served as schoolteacher and part-time librarian. "Reverend Ward's children," she echoed. "Oh no, they don't attend classes here. Why not religious schooling?" she said. "The Reverend teaches them at the manse. Always said public instruction would confuse their faith. I asked once to borrow them for a Christmas choir, but he said their voices weren't ready." Samuel blinked. "Do you recall any of their names?" Miss Pike hesitated. "Well, there was a little girl, one sweet thing, with red ribbons. Sarah, I think. Or maybe it was Ruth. She never spoke much. Didn't come into town often. I remember she smiled when I gave her a peppermint. That was maybe 3-4 years ago. I haven't seen her since. What happened to her?" Miss Pike's mouth tightened. "The Reverend said she got adopted by a family in Pennsylvania. But," she lowered her voice, "I don't remember any wagon leaving town that day. And I always hear wagons." Back at the inn, Mrs. Good was folding linens by the fire. She looked up as Samuel entered. "You've been asking about the Reverend's children," she said plainly. "I have," he answered. She folded a sheet slowly. "Years ago, I saw a child outside my window in the snow. No coat, no shoes. Just standing in the yard behind the manse, looking up at the attic window, like she wanted someone to see her." Samuel sat down across from her. "What happened?" "She disappeared when I blinked. Or maybe she ran. I don't know. But I never saw her again." She glanced at him, then down at the linen in her lap. "You keep digging, Mr. Cutter," she said quietly, "and you best be ready to find what nobody else wanted to know." That night, as Samuel wrote notes by candlelight, he made a list. 27 names from the aid records. No dates of birth. No family names. No baptismal registry, no adoption papers, no graves. He underlined one sentence in the Reverend's filings: "Each soul belongs to God. The body to his keeping." And just before sleep took him, he thought of the voice from the manse the night before. "Don't forget me." The third night in Shadewood brought rain, soft, persistent, and cold. It tapped against the windows of the inn like nervous fingers, and Samuel found himself staring at the ceiling long after midnight, unable to rest. His mind wouldn't let go of the list. 27 names, 27 unknown lives, all wrapped in the same gauze of silence. The girl found in the woods wrapped in ceremonial cloth was not the first. Samuel was sure of it now. She was only the first the town was forced to see. At breakfast, he asked Mrs. Good a careful question. "Do the children ever come into town for supplies, errands?" Mrs. Good paused mid-stir of her porridge. "Not since before the cholera scare 2 years ago," she said quietly. Reverend said they were too vulnerable. Kept them inside after that. Some folks say he's protecting them. Others, she looked away. Well, others don't ask anymore. Samuel decided to attend Thursday evening prayer this time, arriving early. He watched the townsfolk file in, older women with black gloves, young couples in silence, a few elderly men who bowed before sitting. Again, there were no children in attendance. As the service ended and the pews emptied, Samuel lingered near the rear, pretending to study a hymnal. From his corner he observed Reverend Ward, kneeling before the altar long after the last parishioner left. The chapel dimmed. The candles at the altar flickered and a wind passed low through the wooden beams. And then it came. A sound, faint from beneath the floorboards. It was not a word, but a rhythm, a dragging, scraping repetition like metal across stone. Then a sudden thud. Then silence. Samuel turned, heart-hammering. Ward remained in prayer. Or pretending to. Samuel slipped out quietly and circled the back of the church. The manse loomed behind brick darkened by the rain. No lights in the windows, but just past the tool shed he saw it. A narrow cellar door reinforced with thick wood chained shut with a rusted lock. The ground around it was muddied as if recently disturbed. A faint trail barely visible in the wet grass led from the door to a small iron grating beneath the manse's rear foundation. Samuel crouched. Beneath the great darkness, and behind it, a sound, breathing, soft, uneven. He reached for the grate, but a voice called out behind him, "Mr. Cutter." He startled and turned. Reverend Ward stood a few feet away holding an oil lantern that cast his pale face in long shadows. "You'll catch your death poking around like that," the Reverend said mildly. "These old grounds have many holes. Best not fall in." Samuel stood. I was walking, got turned around. Ward smiled gently. "Understandable. The storm clouds confuse even the compass." They stood in silence a moment. Then Ward gestured towards the chapel. "Come inside. Dry off. I'll fix some tea." Inside the manse, the warmth of the hearth contrasted sharply with the cold that had settled into Samuel's bones. The parlor was modest. A bookshelf of scripture. A chair too straight to be comfortable. A portrait of a man, presumably Ward's predecessor, hung above the mantel. As the Reverend poured tea, Samuel took stock. No children's shoes by the door. No toys. No linens drying. No signs that 27 children had ever lived here. "Do the children sleep upstairs?" Samuel asked casually. Ward paused, then nodded. "They do. The girls in the east wing. Boys in the loft. Though most sleep sound these days, we rise early." Samuel sipped the bitter tea. "I'd like to meet them. Soon." "Of course," the Reverend said smoothly. "But they're sensitive. Some were abandoned. Others, well, they carry scars the world can't see. I keep them in peace, Mr. Cutter. I pray you understand." There was something deliberate in that last sentence. A warning cloaked in civility. Samuel nodded. "I understand." Ward smiled again. "Good. Then we'll see each other Sunday. I'll make arrangements for you to visit." But as Samuel left the manse, his tea unfinished and colder than he expected, he glanced back once and saw Ward still standing at the window watching him go. And from somewhere beneath the manse that scraping sound began again. The next morning, Samuel Cutter returned to the chapel not for prayer, but for observation. The Reverend had mentioned someone else who assisted with the children, a young woman named Clarissa. Mrs. Good had called her the church's quiet angel, though she added almost in passing, "That poor girl walks like she's always afraid to make noise." Samuel found Clarissa just after midday in the chapel's side wing where the baptismal font stood. She was polishing brass candlesticks with focused mechanical care. Her brown hair was tied back beneath a linen scarf. Her posture was straight, almost unnaturally so, and she didn't flinch when Samuel greeted her, but she didn't look up either. "Miss Clarissa," he said gently. She paused. "Yes, sir. My name is Samuel Cutter. I'm here from the Public Records Office in Columbus." She nodded faintly, still not meeting his gaze. "I'm trying to understand more about the children who've lived at the manse. Reverend Ward said you help care for them." Her hands stopped. One knuckle tightened around the cloth. "I used to," she whispered. "You don't anymore?" "No, sir. Not lately. Why is that?" She hesitated long enough that the silence became uncomfortable. Then quietly, "They don't like me." Samuel tilted his head. "The children." "No," she said. "He doesn't." The air in the chapel seemed to still. Clarissa placed the cloth down and began aligning the candlesticks with unnecessary precision. "They're good children," she said. "Quiet. They follow rules. They have to. Have you seen them recently?" Clarissa blinked. "I see them when he lets me." Samuel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Clarissa, do you know what happened to the girl they found in the woods?" Her hands froze. After a long moment, she said, "That was Emily." Samuel's breath caught. "You knew her. She had curly hair. She loved Psalm 23. She wasn't quiet enough." Clarissa's voice wavered on the last word, and for the first time her eyes flicked toward his, but never all the way up. She looked at his chin as though eye contact was forbidden. "I'm trying to help," Samuel said carefully. "But I need someone who can tell the truth." Clarissa swallowed hard. "The truth is dangerous here, more dangerous than silence." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand what he is." Before Samuel could ask, more heavy footsteps echoed from the front of the chapel. Clarissa snapped back into motion, folding the cloth, neatly adjusting her sleeves, backing away from the font, as if she'd been caught stealing from God. Reverend Ward entered his footsteps, soft, his smile warm. But his eyes flicked briefly to Samuel, then Clarissa. "Ah," he said, "I see you've met our Miss Clarissa, a dedicated servant of the Lord, aren't you?" "Child?" Clarissa lowered her head. "Yes, Reverend." Ward turned to Samuel. "I trust you're finding our little town most welcoming." Samuel forced a smile. "It's quiet." Ward chuckled. "Peace is a blessing most city men don't understand." His gaze lingered on Clarissa for a beat too long before he spoke again. "Well then," he said, "I must attend to the evening preparations. Clarissa, I believe the hymnals need dusting." "Yes, Reverend," she whispered. As Samuel turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of Clarissa's hands, both trembling, and for just a second she dared to meet his eyes. What he saw there wasn't just fear. It was a plea. Samuel Cutter had spent enough time in courthouses and probate offices to recognize one truth: children do not go missing unless someone is making sure they're forgotten. The chapel's records were clean, too clean. But Clarissa's voice haunted him. That was Emily. She wasn't quiet enough. And the trembling in her hands wasn't just fear. It was memory. Samuel waited until dusk when the chapel doors were locked and the Reverend's study candle burned steady behind thick curtains. He walked around the east side of the manse and found a narrow path partially overgrown with vines. It led to a small one-story brick structure attached to the manse by a covered breezeway. The door was locked, but the hinges were weak. With some effort, Samuel slipped a flat iron from his satchel beneath the latch, and the door creaked open with a groan of old wood and rust. Inside was dust, and silence. Desks, perhaps 8 in all, arranged in orderly rows. A cracked slate board at the front. Shelves of tattered books, untouched for years. The air held that stale, paper-rotting scent of long abandonment. This had been a classroom, but not recently. The back wall was covered in children's drawings still pinned by rusted tacks. They were faded but legible charcoal chalk and bits of crayon. Samuel stepped closer. The first few were innocent enough stick figures, trees, suns with smiling faces. Then came the others, a child with X's over its mouth. A large man with no eyes. A staircase leading downward with shadows reaching up. A cage drawn in thick lines. A pair of hands holding a cross, but the cross was upside down. And then one that stopped him cold, a large room with stone walls. Inside, several small figures sat in circles, chained at the ankle. One child had written in shaky letters beneath the drawing, "He says this is God's mercy." Samuel turned toward the desk at the far end of the room. Dust coated everything, but when he brushed it away from the surface, he found the initials carved into the wood, AF. He opened the desk drawer. Empty, except for a single crumpled page. A letter, a note. He smoothed it out on the desk and read, "Today, Emily cried again. She misses the light. I told her not to talk so much. He watches, even when we think he's gone. There are eyes in the wall. I heard Clarissa praying, but not with words. She does it with her hands now. Maybe if I stop remembering, he'll stop looking at me. AF." The room felt colder suddenly. Samuel stepped back toward the door, but not before noticing a final drawing smaller than the rest, pinned low near the floor, as if drawn by the youngest hand. It showed a stick-figure girl standing at a window. Outside the window was the moon. Inside, the room behind her was a shadow, tall, angular. Above it, a name had been scribbled, then scratched out. Only the first letter remained, E. Suddenly, Samuel heard something behind him. A soft shuffle. A click. A creak of old hinges. He turned just in time to see the classroom door closing by itself. He lunged forward, catching it before it shut completely. No one was there. Just the wind, maybe. Or maybe not. Back at the inn, Samuel laid out the drawings on his bedspread, trying to organize what he now understood to be fragments of truth messages left by children who were never meant to grow up. He looked again at the initials AF and whispered aloud, "Anna." It rained again the next morning, the kind of cold, steady rain that soaked into wood and bone, turning everything gray. Samuel sat at the small writing desk in his room at the inn, carefully unfolding the children's drawings one by one. But his eyes kept returning to the initials AF Anna and the letter describing Emily. She misses the light. He knew there had to be more. Children, even silenced, try to leave breadcrumbs. Just after noon, under the pretense of requesting copies of hymn schedules, Samuel returned to the chapel and asked to see the scripture room where older religious texts and records were kept. Clarissa was there. She glanced up only briefly when he entered, then looked down again, stacking hymnals in silence. Samuel let her work for a moment before walking to the far wall. The bookshelf there looked unremarkable except for one thick Bible whose leather spine had long since split. He pulled it down. Something shifted. Inside the hollowed center, nestled beneath a folded altar cloth, was a small cloth-bound notebook, worn water-stained and tied with fraying twine. No name on the cover. But inside, the first page written in a childish hand, "If you're reading this, you're not supposed to be." And below it, smaller, "My name is Anna Francis. I am 11 years old." Samuel sat down slowly, heart pounding, and began to read. March 4th, Reverend says I must not talk to the others during prayers. But sometimes we have to whisper or we forget who we are. March 12th, Emily cried again. I gave her half my bread. Reverend saw and took away my blanket. April 1st. Clarissa used to smile. Now she only hums. She says music is safer than words. April 9th. I think there are more of us than Reverend says. I hear voices at night from behind the walls. April 20th. No one remembers when they came here. Not even Peter. He says maybe we were always here. That can't be right. May 2nd. There's a door beneath the altar. Emily says it leads to the deep chapel, but we're not allowed near it. May 10th. Reverend told us the outside world is sick, that we're kept here for safety. But if that's true, why does it hurt so much? May 15th. Today, Emily spoke during prayer. She said God wouldn't want this. That night we heard her scream. The next morning her bed was empty. May 16th. Clarissa was crying in the storeroom. I think she saw it. What he did. May 20th. I tried to draw the room below, in case someone finds this. May 21st. I don't think I'll be here much longer. May 22nd. He said I am stubborn, that I must learn silence. May 23rd. If you find this, please don't forget us. The last page had no writing, only a smudge like a tear or blood and a crude drawing of chains. Samuel sat, frozen notebook, trembling in his hands. Clarissa stood nearby, motionless, watching him. She hadn't moved the entire time. I was supposed to burn it, she said softly. He made me promise. Samuel looked up. But you didn't. She shook her head. She was brave, Clarissa whispered. Braver than me. Samuel crossed the room gently, placing a hand on her arm. It's not too late. Clarissa looked at him, eyes glassy with old terror, and something else, hope, maybe just a flicker. Then, almost too quiet to hear, she said the altar. It's hollow. The storm returned that night. Lightning danced over the Shadewood Chapel as if heaven itself were trying to illuminate its secrets. Thunder rolled, low and heavy, shaking the windows of the inn where Samuel Cutter sat, wide awake, clutching Anna's notebook to his chest. Her words haunted him, each line, written with the quiet desperation of a child trying to outlive a truth too big for her. But it was Clarissa's voice that echoed loudest, the altar. It's hollow. He would go back. He would see for himself. But when he arrived at the chapel just past dawn, the doors were bolted shut. No service that day, no reverend, no Clarissa. He waited until mid-morning before circling the back of the manse. No smoke from the chimney, no sound, just the wind and the scent of wet wood. At noon he returned to the inn. Mrs. Good was wringing out dishcloths at the basin. You seen Clarissa today? Samuel asked. She paused, then frowned. No, I haven't. Samuel hesitated. She mentioned her mother being ill. Did she leave town? Mrs. Good shook her head slowly. She's got no mother. At least not one still living. A cold tightness closed around Samuel's chest. Later that afternoon, he went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Keyes sat behind the desk, hat tipped low over his brow. I'd like to report a missing person. Samuel said. "Clarissa Reverend Ward's assistant." "No one's seen her today." The sheriff sighed. "She left this morning. Reverend said she had family matters out east." Samuel stiffened. "Did anyone see her leave?" "She boarded the mail coach around 5. Reverend paid her fare in full. That coach doesn't run on Saturdays." The sheriff looked up slowly. "Mr. Cutter," he said, "I know you're trying to do your job. But Reverend Ward is a respected man, and Clarissa. Maybe she didn't want to be part of whatever you're stirring up. Maybe she left for her own peace." Samuel stood in silence, jaw tight. When he turned to leave, the sheriff added, without looking up, "Sometimes people disappear because they want to. Other times, it's best not to dig too deep into why they don't come back." That night, Samuel sat by lamplight and reviewed every page of Anna's journal again. The timeline, the names, the drawings. And then he noticed something he'd missed before. On the inside back cover, faint pressed hard with a stylus or perhaps a nail, were a series of numbers. Not Word's coordinates. Samuel fetched a map of the chapel property. Measured, cross-referenced with the cellar door behind the manse. The numbers didn't match. They pointed to something else. A small rectangle on the blueprint labeled Foundation Stone, East Wing. The base of the altar. Clarissa hadn't just hinted. She'd told him. But now she was gone. The next morning, Samuel Cutter rode to the county recorder's office 2 towns over in Fairhope. Shadewood, with all its silence and shadow, had made one thing very clear. If the truth was going to be found, it would not be inside that chapel's walls. It would be in ink, in paper, in names. He requested the deed history for the property marked Shadewood Chapel and Manse, and was handed a bundle of yellowing records tied with wax string. The original deed was dated August 3rd, 1831. It detailed the transfer of land from a local landowner named Horace Beckett to a religious authority listed as E. Ward for the purpose of establishing a home for the unclaimed and unsaved. Samuel froze. Elijah Ward would have been a child. The name couldn't be the same. He checked again. The signature on the deed read in careful looping script, Elijah A. Ward. It wasn't a clerical error. This was the same man, but the date didn't match. The Reverend Ward Samuel had met the one running the manse could not have been old enough to sign legal property deeds in 1831. That would have made him over 60 now, and the man he'd spoken to looked no older than 40. And yet, here it was. Signed, witnessed, sealed, in the same precise hand that filled the children's aid records. Samuel flipped through the accompanying documents. Permits. Receipts for stone shipments, specifically a reinforced foundation beneath the east wing. Requests for furnishings from a nearby orphanage supply house dated 1832. But one item in particular caught his eye. A letter folded among the deeds. It was addressed not to a church, but to the Society of Reformed Asylums, an obscure organization Samuel had never heard of. The letter was written by E. Ward and contained phrases that made his stomach turn. The isolation of the site has proven ideal for long-term spiritual conditioning. Several of the newer arrivals continue to resist indoctrination, but the deeper rituals have begun to quiet them. I have begun the process of preparing permanent holding arrangements beneath the chapel's foundation as discussed. No mention of names, no mention of children. Only the word subjects. Samuel returned to Shadewood at dusk. He walked slowly past the chapel hands in his coat pockets and looked at the structure again, its stone base, its simple cross, the humble wooden door worn smooth by decades of prayer. But now he knew better. That door didn't open to salvation. It opened to a lie. Back at the inn, he laid out his notes and began to construct the timeline. 1831 land deed, signed by Elijah A. Ward. 1832, 1845. First recorded purchases of medical supplies and construction materials, 1846 to 1849. Aid applications begin listing children none of whom appear in census or birth records. 1850. Dead girl found in the woods. No identification. No cause. Present. Clarissa missing. The altar suspected hollow. Foundation stone marked in blueprint. There was one constant across all entries. E. Ward, same name, same hand, over 19 years. Samuel reached for Anna's notebook again, flipping back to a page with what he had once thought were childlike drawings of eyes. Now he wasn't so sure. They were watching from inside walls, from below, from places no child should have been. He closed the book and said aloud, "What are you, Reverend Ward?" Samuel Cutter didn't sleep that night. The fire in his room at the inn crackled low, but the cold was no longer from the rain outside. It came from a deeper place, the knowledge that someone had been lying for decades right in plain sight, and no one had dared to look closely until now. He rose before dawn and returned to the chapel, this time not through the front, but around the side past the row of graves, and down the path toward the small servants' quarters Clarissa once used. It was a cramped space, narrow bed, modest desk, and a single trunk at the foot. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and mildew. A small mirror above the wash basin was cracked at the corner. Beneath it, a brush with several long strands of dark hair still clinging to its bristles. The room looked frozen in time, untouched. Samuel opened the trunk. Folded garments, a cracked rosary, a set of dog-eared psalms. Beneath a false bottom he found a bundle of pages tied with red thread, a letter never sent, written in a neat, deliberate hand, addressed to Diocese of Cleveland Office of Ecclesiastical Oversight, R.E., urgent concerns regarding the Shadewood Manse, and Reverend Elijah Ward Samuel began to read. To whom it may concern, my name is Clarissa Hale. I have served under Reverend Ward at the Shadewood Manse since I was 15 years old. I write with grave concern and a heavy heart, compelled by what I can no longer witness in silence. There are children here, many, more than the church lists in its records. They are not permitted to speak freely, they do not attend services, they do not attend school. Some disappear in the night and no one ever speaks of them again. I have seen what lies beneath the chapel. I was told never to return there. I did what I found. I cannot put into words. There are rooms with stone walls, metal restraints, and beds that are not beds. There is a book. He keeps it locked. I have seen names crossed out, always with a date, never with a destination. Reverend Ward says we are saving them. But I no longer believe he worships the same God as I do. His prayers are not prayers. His rituals are cruel. There is something older behind his sermons, something not of Scripture and not of mercy. He does not age. I do not mean that poetically. In the 10 years I have served here, his face has not changed. His eyes remain untouched, cold. I once saw him standing in the graveyard during a storm. Lightning struck a tree not 10 feet away. He did not flinch. I fear what he truly is. If this letter reaches you, please send help quietly. He sees more than he should. He hears what he should not. I do not know how long I have left before he... The letter ended abruptly. The last line trailed off, the ink smeared. There were no more pages. Just a single symbol drawn at the bottom corner. A simple I, drawn in dark red ink. Samuel stared at the pages, his heart thudding. He now had evidence from Anna, from Clarissa, that something unnatural had been festering beneath Shadewood for decades. Not just criminal, not just evil, but deliberate and ancient. When he stepped out of the servants' quarters, the dawn mist clung low to the gravestones. A shadow moved across the chapel steps. Reverend Ward stood there watching him, not with anger, but with patience, as though he had always known this moment would come, and perhaps had been waiting for it. The chapel was empty by mid-afternoon. Samuel Cutter waited until the light slanted low across the pews and the town's rhythms dulled to whispers. No parishioners, no hymns, no Reverend Ward. He entered through the side door, notebook and lantern in hand, and approached the altar with cautious reverence, not out of piety, but fear. The marble slab was cold to the touch, worn smooth by decades of hands. He knelt beside it and ran his fingers along the base until he found what Clarissa had hinted at, a seam. Almost invisible, but unmistakable. He pressed inward, and the stone shifted. A soft click. Then slowly, the front of the altar swung open, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness cut from old stone older than the chapel itself. The air that escaped smelled of mildew-damp clay, and something harder to name, age, perhaps, or rot. Samuel lit his lantern and began to descend. The steps were uneven, slippery. He counted them in his head. 34. Then 40, then 52, far deeper than any chapel basement should go. At the base, he found a door. Wood, reinforced, stained dark in patches. It opened with a long, reluctant groan. Inside was silence. But it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of held breath. A long corridor stretched ahead, lined with iron-barred chambers. Each one barely the size of a pantry. Some were empty. Others? In one, a small doll lay in the corner, untouched by time. In another, faint markings on the wall, names scratched by fingernails. He passed cells marked with crude symbols, circles with crosses, inverted stars, Latin phrases etched above the arches, serva silentium, keep silence. Then he reached the end. A larger room, octagonal in shape, lit faintly by shafts of light filtering through a grate above. Chains hung from the walls. A pulpit stood in the center, stone, not wood, covered in dust and wax drippings, and behind it, on a pedestal, rested a book. Bound in cracked leather, its clasp sealed with iron. Samuel approached, heart pounding. He opened the cover. Inside were names, hundreds, each marked with a date, and a final column, a symbol. Some had crosses, some X's, others bore glyphs he didn't recognize. He turned page after page. Some names were familiar. Emily Grace, Anna Francis, Peter Hill, Sarah L. Others were not. Then, near the beginning, he stopped. Clarissa Hale. Marked not with a date, but with a blank space, and beside her name a symbol that matched the one at the bottom of her unsent letter, the I. Suddenly, above him a sound. The grate shifted. Samuel looked up and saw 2 boots at the edge of the shaft, then a voice. "Curiosity," Mr. Cutter said. "Reverend Ward is not always a virtue." The grate slammed shut. Darkness rushed in, and Samuel realized with a cold clarity that he was no longer alone in the chamber. From the far corner something moved. Samuel Cutter froze. The lantern flickered, casting long, nervous shadows across the stone walls of the octagonal chamber. He turned slowly toward the far corner, the one where the movement had come from. At first he saw nothing. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Small, thin, barefoot. It was a boy no older than 10, his eyes wide and hollow, his skin pale and mottled with grime. He said nothing, only looked at Samuel with a stare that had forgotten what sunlight felt like. Samuel took a cautious step forward, his voice low. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The boy blinked, then turned and pointed behind him toward the narrow hall Samuel had come from. Samuel raised the lantern, and there, slowly stepping from the darkened chambers, more figures appeared. A girl with tangled hair and a torn dress, a pair of siblings clutching each other too frightened to cry, a teenage boy missing 2 fingers, eyes blank with resignation. 7 children, no 8. One last older girl, perhaps 14, stood at the very back, her arms marked with thin scars. She stared at Samuel not with fear, but recognition. "You're the man from the chapel," she whispered. Samuel nodded. "My name is Samuel Cutter. I came to find the truth." She stepped forward. "Then you found us." His voice trembled. "How long have you been here?" She didn't answer right away. "Then I was 5 when Reverend Ward brought me. My brother was 6. He's gone now." Her tone was flat, dry, like someone who had learned to speak without emotion. Samuel knelt down. "We need to get you out." The girl looked up at the ceiling. "There's no way out, just the way in, and he controls that." Samuel clenched his fists. "Not anymore." But just as he spoke, a sound echoed through the corridor's metal scraping on stone. The iron door at the top of the stairwell, closing, locking. The children flinched in unison. "He knows," the girl said simply. "He always knows." Samuel stood scanning the walls. He wouldn't accept this, not now, not after what he'd seen. He rushed to the edge of the room, inspecting the stonework, the ventilation grate, the columns. Then he saw it. A recess in the wall half covered by a wooden panel. Inside, a service shaft, just wide enough for a child, and maybe for him. Samuel turned to the children. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "There's a tunnel here. If we stay, he wins. If we move now, we have a chance." The girl nodded first, then the others. They moved quickly, quietly, like they'd done it before in their dreams. One by one, Samuel helped them into the shaft until only he remained. He looked back once at the book on the pedestal, the register of names. He tore the final pages free and shoved them into his coat. Then he climbed into the shaft and began crawling toward what he prayed was light. The tunnel was suffocating. Samuel Cutter crawled through on elbows and knees, the stone walls pressing in on both sides, his breath echoing in the narrow shaft. Behind him, he could hear the children silent but present. Every scrape of their movements was a reminder they were real. They were still alive. After what felt like half an hour, the tunnel widened, spilling into a dusty crawlspace beneath the eastern wing of the chapel. Above, narrow slats of rotted wood filtered weak light through gaps in the floorboards. Samuel pressed a hand upward. The panel groaned, then gave. They emerged into a forgotten vestry filled with extinguished candles and relics covered in wax. Everything was coated in dust undisturbed for years, and yet the candles had recently been used. The wax at their base was soft. Some still held faint traces of scent frankincense and something else, something metallic. On the far wall was a mural half faded by moisture. It depicted an angel kneeling before a robed man, but the man's face had been scratched out. Samuel stepped closer. Beneath the paint, just barely visible, was another image, hidden under layers of time. He scraped at the flaking pigment, revealed beneath a symbol. The eye. Same as in Clarissa's letter. Same as beside her name. The children stood close now, clustered around the mural. The oldest girl, her name was Miriam Samuel, had finally asked, reached out and traced the eye with her finger. He calls it the Watching One, she said. He says it sees our sins before we do. Samuel turned. Who is he? The Reverend, she said softly. But not just him. That last part sent a chill down his back. He turned to the youngest child, a boy of perhaps 6. What's your name? Samuel asked. The boy blinked slowly. Jacob. Do you remember when you came here? The boy shook his head. No, but I remember the candles. When they go out, someone disappears. Samuel's throat tightened. How many candles were here? Jacob pointed to the stone shelf behind them. It held 14 blackened holders. Only 8 still held wax. Miriam whispered, "The others are the ones who didn't listen fast enough." Suddenly a crash echoed from above, the heavy thud of a door flung open. Voices. Boots. They'd been found. Samuel moved quickly, guiding the children to the back of the room, where a narrow spiral stair led up to a sacristy. If they could get outside just once, they could run. They could scream. Someone had to listen. He turned to Miriam. "Can you be brave?" She nodded once. "Then take the others. Go. Fast. Find the sheriff. Find Mrs. Good. Tell them everything." "What about you?" she asked. Samuel looked back toward the stairs where shadows moved just out of sight. "I need to finish this." He turned toward the mural again, reached behind the candle shelf and pulled. The wall shifted. Another hidden stair leading down. Not into a cellar this time, but deeper. Into earth. He turned once more. The children were gone. The stair behind him was waiting. Samuel Cutter descended into the darkness toward whatever lay beneath the Watching One's eye. The stairwell narrowed as Samuel Cutter descended, each step colder than the last. The walls changed from rough stone to something smoother cut marble, veined with black and green. The air turned dense, carrying a scent like burnt oil and old parchment. This was no longer the foundation of a chapel. This was something older. At the base, he stepped into a circular chamber torchlit, though no flames burned. Instead, the sconces pulsed with a faint amber glow like dying embers that never extinguished. And at the center stood a man. Tall, hands folded behind his back. Robes dark stitched with thread that shimmered in the strange light. Reverend Elijah Ward. He turned slowly as though he'd been expecting Samuel for hours. His face was calm, ageless, not young, not old. Just fixed. "Mr. Cutter," he said, voice smooth as silk soaked in stone. "You've come far." Samuel didn't answer. His eyes scanned the room. Symbols carved into the floor. Circles, lines, the eye. Always the eye. Ward continued. "You've seen the children. You've seen the rooms. You've read her words. And still you descend. That is rare." "What are you?" Samuel finally said, voice low. Ward smiled. "Not kindly. Once I was like you. Curious. Burdened by questions. But questions only lead to thresholds. And some thresholds change a man forever." He stepped toward the pedestal at the chamber's center, a black altar, not of wood or stone, but of something darker, almost absorbing light. Resting atop it, a bowl filled with ash. Bones, a ring, a lock of hair. "Do you know what faith becomes?" Ward whispered, "when it no longer requires God." Samuel clenched his fists. A lie. Ward's eyes glinted. No, a door. He reached into his robe and removed a small book, the same one Clarissa had mentioned. Bound in gray skin sealed with a latch of bone. He opened it with a snap. "Names," he said. "Each one a promise, a contract. Not with heaven, but with endurance." Samuel stepped forward, voice trembling now with fury. "They're children. "They are keys," Ward corrected. "Unshaped, untouched, pure. Each one opens another lock. Each one lengthens the span." Samuel's voice cracked. "That's why you don't age." Ward nodded. "I walked into this place in 1829. I was 32. That was 70 years ago. The price is heavy. But I have not paid it alone." He gestured toward the walls where alcoves stood, each with bones, dried hands, teeth set in soft cloth. Samuel's hand reached into his coat fingers, curling around the pages from the register. "These children," he said, "were never forgotten. Their names live on. I have them, and I'll make sure the world sees them." Ward's smile faded. "You won't leave here, neither will you." Samuel struck a match not at Ward but at the altar. The pages ignited instantly. The ash in the bowl flared, releasing a shriek so sharp it made Samuel fall to his knees. The symbols on the floor began to glow. Ward screamed, not in pain but in rage. "You blind fool! Do you know what you've unbound?" The chamber shook. Cracks split the walls. The sconces burst, raining sparks. And from deep below, something stirred a groan like a mountain waking from sleep. Samuel turned and ran. Up the steps, into smoke, into flame, into whatever light remained above. Samuel Cutter burst from the underground with fire in his lungs and panic in his veins. The air above was thick with smoke dust and the faint cries of alarm coming from beyond the chapel. Flames had erupted from deep within the earth, crawling up the cracks in Shadewood's old walls like a living thing finally unshackled. Villagers had gathered. Their faces were pale with horror as they saw the black smoke billowing from the steeple of their holy place. Some came running with buckets of water, then stopped cold when they saw him, torn clothes, soot-covered face, eyes wide with something too large for words. And then the children emerged. From the side door of the chapel, 8 of them stepped into the fading light. Miriam led them. They didn't cry, they didn't tremble. They stood in silence, watching the crowd, waiting for something, recognition. A question. A hand. But no one moved. Only the chapel bell rang out behind them, soft, slow tolls as if sounding its own funeral. Sheriff Keyes stepped forward, his face ashen. "My God, what the hell happened in there?" Samuel said nothing at first. He pulled the remaining pages from inside his coat, the children's names, the dates, the symbols, and handed them over. "They're not dead," he said, "but they've been kept silent far too long." Mrs. Good rushed toward the smallest child, Jacob, kneeling before him. "Where are you from, sweetheart?" The boy looked up at her. "I don't know. I just remember footsteps and darkness." Miriam approached Samuel. "He's still down there, isn't he?" Samuel nodded. "And whatever he was serving, it doesn't need the light to survive." At that moment, a deep sound echoed from the earth beneath them. It wasn't a voice, not quite a scream. It was something older, the hum of 100 swallowed voices groaning at once from beneath the soil. And then silence. Shadewood Chapel collapsed. Not in a great blast, not violently, but quietly sinking as if the land itself had opened its mouth to reclaim it. The final scent in the air wasn't ash or timber. It was wax sweet and burnt, the kind used for candles during rituals long forgotten. Miriam took Samuel's hand. "We still remember our names," she whispered. Samuel looked at the villagers, then at the sky clearing at last. And now, he said, everyone else will remember them too. Shadewood never recovered. That winter snow fell earlier than expected. It covered the blackened remains of the chapel with a thin white veil, as if the land itself wished to forget what had once stood there. But memory, like frost, has a way of seeping into the cracks. The children, those who had survived, were taken in by nearby families, some by cousins who thought them long lost, others by strangers who understood only that these quiet souls had returned from someplace unspeakable. Miriam went to live with the good family. Jacob stayed close to Samuel. They rarely spoke of what lay beneath that place, but sometimes in the early morning Samuel would catch them staring out toward the empty lot where the chapel had stood listening. And some nights, when the wind howled too long through the bare branches, he could swear he heard the faint echo of a bell that no longer hung. Samuel Cutter returned to the diocese in Cleveland with the names, the papers, and the testimony. A formal inquiry was launched. It uncovered nothing. No records of Elijah Ward's ordination, no records of his birth, no relatives, no official ties to any church body in Ohio. The original deed to the land, dated 1831 and signed by Ward's own hand, was dismissed as either forgery or coincidence. One bishop, older than most, simply said, "Some wolves wear collars, and some collars are woven from darker cloth." The investigation was quietly closed. In the spring, Samuel visited the field where the altar once stood. Nothing remained but soft earth and the faint outline of the chapel's foundations. He stood there a long time. Then he knelt, opened his notebook, and wrote the last words of his report. There are places in this world where time does not move forward, where breath is taken but not returned, where men speak in prayers that do not reach heaven. I have seen one of them. I have heard the silence it leaves behind, but I have also seen children who remember their names. He closed the notebook, set a stone on top of it, and walked away.